Hello and welcome to my essentially study guide for the SIE exam. I'm Travis, and this is most likely just for personal use, but if you stumble across it, cool, I guess. So I'm just going to be going over the things that I studied about and retained from today's readings. So first thing I learned about were the different kinds of securities, and the first one that was covered were stocks, and it talked quite a bit about dividends. You got the dividend disbursement dates that are important. There's the declaration date when the board of directors says, hey, we're going to have dividends. And then there's the ex-dividend date where you need to have, where if someone wants to receive the dividend, they need to have purchased the stock before this ex-dividend date. The record date is when the company just gets the list of everyone who has stock, and then the payable date is when the money goes out. So the acronym for that is DERP, Declaration, Ex, Record, and Payable. There are different kinds of voting, statutory versus cumulative voting. Statutory is basically the share, if you have 100 shares, you get 100 votes for each of the different board positions. Cumulative is you can allocate your votes depending on which board position you think is most important for you. Statutory is better for institutional or large investors. Cumulative is much better for smaller investors who want to take an activist role in the company. Then you also have disclosure requirements if you own more than 10% as a family unit of stock in a given company. You have to file to make sure that everyone knows that you're selling, and also there are limits on how much you can sell. It's the greater of either 1% of the total amount of stock, or I believe it's the average of the most recent 4 weeks of trading for the stock. So if it averages at 25,000 shares a week, you can sell 25,000 shares a week, or 1% of the total outstanding shares, whichever is greater. American depository receipts. It's a way that you can invest in a foreign company. Basically, a bank you talk to a bank, and they, using one of their foreign branches, purchases stock in that company, and then they just pass dividends on to you through the bank. It doesn't give you as many things, but it does give you exposure to foreign markets if that's something that someone is interested in. You probably won't give voting rights. The bank will probably hold on to them. Those aren't necessarily passed on, but they might be. So there's preferred stock, which is different from common stock in that you don't get votes. You do get priority for dividends and priority for settlement in case of a bankruptcy. There are a couple of ways that these preferred stocks can pay out their dividends. They're straight, where it's if that dividend is paid, you get your dividend, but if there's no dividend paid, you don't get a dividend. There's cumulative, where if the company decides not to pay a dividend for a couple of years, you accumulate an amount of dividend that you should get paid out, and when they resume dividend payments, you get extra money, or what you should have been given earlier. So if it was like 10 cents per share per year, then in the first quarter, if they've not done it if they do it quarterly, so depends on how often they reimburse and how often they pay out the dividends. So, but yeah, so it accumulates over time, and so you can get extra money that way. And then we get into bonds, and bonds are very fun because they're mainly fun because most of the time they're supposed to be boring, which is what they're good at most of the time, unless you invest into a failing company, and then it's exciting because it's scary. So you have the term of maturity, which is how long the bond is for. There are a couple ways of doing it. You can have a term, which is they pay out interest payments over time, and then boom, here's your loan. Here's the principal that you gave us all right at the end. There's serial, where they space out the principal payments over time. And then there's balloon, which is kind of a combination of both. They space out smaller payments and then give you a larger chunk of your principal right at the end. The coupon is the interest rate to be paid out, named after the fact that when you were issued a bond, there was a thing, a coupon stapled to it, so that you'd pull off a coupon and go to turn that in to receive your payment. That's not done anymore, but retains the name. A lot of things in finance retain names from back when they were all a paper system, so a lot of weird names are retained. So the yields that you get, there's the nominal yield, which is just what it says on the bond, the current yield, which is how much the bond is selling for, versus the coupon yield, and you calculate that in an annualized rate of return. And then yield to maturity, current yield is market price versus coupon, sorry. And then yield to maturity is you annualize the rate of return if it's held to maturity. And also there's yield to call. There might be something called a call option on a bond, where the issuer of the bond can say, hey, I'm going to pay it out early. I once invested in Solar City for a bond, and they were like, hey, I know it's a 10-year bond, but it's been 30 days, so here's your money. Mainly because Elon wanted his money, and so so everyone who invested in that series of bonds got their money early, which was nice, kind of surprising. I made a little bit of money off of that one, not very much, but it was fun. Okay. And then there are bond ratings. The investment grade bonds are AAA, AA, A, and BBB. Those are the Standard & Poor's ones. Moody's has a slightly different but very similar rating system. Anything lower than that is usually considered junk bond or speculative bond or high yield, meaning that the company issuing it has to pay a very high interest rate if they want anyone to lend them money. There's some features, the call feature, which we talked about. It's often done when exercised when rates are falling. So if the interest rate is falling, the company could be like, bye, here's your money, we're gonna reborrow at this much more favorable rate, basically refinance your mortgage. Put feature gives investors an early cash out for when rates are rising if they want to cash out and get more money from a different bond or other thing. And convertible, which is fun because it's a car with a top down. Just kidding. It's you can turn your bond into an amount of common stock. There are also zero coupon bonds, which basically sell at a discount for the principal, and then they pay out the whole principal. Like, it could be a bond that sells for $800 at the start, and at the end you get $1,000 out. And the interest rate is calculated based on like the rate of return for that, and taxes are paid on those based on phantom income or phantom interest. So people will get a little tax sheet to fill out, and it's like if it sells for $500 and it's a 10-year bond, then you'll be paying $50 of tax per year, even if you haven't earned the $50 yet. So that's one thing to keep in mind with zeros. Collateralized bonds, things that a company issues where they actually have stuff on the line, like real estate, trains, machines, and stuff, or securities. They might have stocks in other companies or stock in their own company, things like that. Unsecures, I promise I'll pay it back. The most common is debentures. There's another kind of guaranteed bond, which is usually issued by, like, the original issuer is a subsidiary and it's guaranteed by the parent company. There are income bonds, which kind of a weird name, but it's if a company has had bankruptcy, they will only pay out the interest if they have enough money incoming to furnish to pay the interest on the bonds. So a little bit Then subordinated debt, which is just everything sketchy. So in case of bankruptcy, which is probably the most important thing when people are thinking about bonds, um, if you have paid secured debt, you're gonna get paid out first. Unsecured debt is after all that. Subordinate debt is after all of that, which means that subordinate debt, it's not great. You then get preferred stock, so this is the benefit of preferred stock. Even if you don't have voting rights on it, you still get paid out before common stock. Common stock has last priority because you get the common stock gets the benefits during the good times, but takes more risk during hard times. So the good about bonds, they're safe. It's a consistent income stream. The risks, default, interest rate fluctuations, and inflation means that your purchasing ability for the income decreases over time. So higher inflation means that bonds become less desirable. You get municipal bonds. Most municipal bonds are not subject to federal taxes in the United States. They may be subject to state taxes. It depends on the jurisdiction. Territory bonds are not subject to any state or federal taxes, which is great. So that gives territories like Puerto Rico and other places like I think Guam an easier time to borrow money at a lower interest rate but still be attractive to investors. So there's general obligation where it's paid by taxes. Usually it requires voters to vote to raise the tax burden on them to pay for this debt. There are revenue bonds where it's like a toll road or other revenue generating infrastructure will pay for the debt on its own. And so those are the two kinds of municipal debt bonds. There are other kinds of shorter term ones that just go for little bits of time. Yeah. Then we get into U.S. Treasuries. We get the Treasury bills, which are short-term, like 4-week, 13-week, 26-week, and 52-week. So 1 month, roughly a month, roughly 90 days, half a year, and a year. And then you get the Treasury notes, which are 2 to 10 years, and the Treasury bonds, which are greater than 10 years. And then there are a couple other things like the farm credit system, raising money for farmers. You also get the the stuff that's backed by the Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae. Those guys also issue bonds of some kinds or issue bonds/treasuries to pay for, like, that are backed by mortgages. And then you get money market stuff, which is typically things that are under 1 year to maturity. Certificate of deposit, which is not the stuff that you can get from your bank. It's minimum face value of $100,000. So it's not a retail one. It's different. Or also called a jumbo CD. It's sold at the face value, and then you receive the face value plus interest at the end. Banker's acceptance. It's a short-term one used in international trade. Corporate paper or commercial paper, which is basically like a short-term IOU for a reliable company that has a good balance sheet and good track record of paying things off. You got treasury bills, which I talked about just barely. There's repurchase agreements. I'll sell you this pen and then I'll buy it back from you for 5% interest on it, like 5% higher. Like, here's the just here, hold on to this for a bit, and I'll buy it back a little bit later. Just a super quick loan. Federal funds loans, which banks use when they have excess deposits with the Federal Reserve Bank. And then you get a bunch of asset-backed mortgages and stuff. Asset-backed things like collateralized mortgage obligations, which is, yeah, this is, I guess, a different section. So it's like you got a whole bunch of mortgages pooled together, and then it kind of diversifies the risk away from the individual mortgages, because if one mortgage fails, it doesn't mean that like the whole pool of mortgages all fail, unless 2008. But most of the time nowadays people are a bit more cautious about their lending, so it's a bit safer. It's probably safer than it was back then. And then you also get a related thing called collateralized debt obligations, which is basically same thing but not mortgages. It's various forms of bonds and usually auto loans and things like that. So those are all packaged together to provide more liquidity to investors. That's it for the first two sections of what I studied today. So yeah, thanks.